Okay, let's move on to our next slide, which of course is looking at comment. Thank you, Tembi. So, as we've said before, and I used the South African example, but comment generally is fair, it is protected. But there are a couple of caveats, and it's very, very important, especially as we move into this environment that we're in, where, thanks to social media, we're now living in an environment where there's a terrible blurring of reportage and opinion. So if you want your comment to be protected, it has to be marked as such, as comment or opinion. The commentary must be fair, even if it is extreme. It must, objectively speaking, qualify as honest and genuine, even if it is prejudiced or exaggerated, and it must be relevant to the facts upon which it is based, not the malice of the author. Okay. The facts on which it is based must be true or substantially true and stated as such in the commentary, unless these facts are widely known at the time. And once again, the commentary should be on a matter of public interest. It's very, very important that, so you've got to, there's a lot you can get away with in terms of commentary and opinion, but it has to be marked as such, and you cannot continue. And once again, this is very, very important when we look at what we've seen unfolding, particularly in America in the dying days of the Donald Trump administration, with the weaponizing of fake news and the perpetuating of myths and fables. Comment will not be protected when the so-called facts upon which the person uttering that opinion, when those facts are fake and shown to be fake. And also it's got to be in the public interest. So I mean, that I would have said this whole issue around the election being stolen, which has been proven over and over again to be false, all of that, and the opinions, and then the opinions thereafter that led to the storming of the Capitol, none of that would have been protected comment, because it was fake it was totally false and a lie from the actual origin. Let's move, shall we, to defamation and invasion of privacy, please. On the next slide. Okay. These are separate areas of law, but they do interrelate, and I think we've been chatting about that throughout. We've been touching on each. There needs to be the same justification for both issues. If you're going to invade someone's privacy, you do it because there's a public interest, and when you publish it after you've invaded their privacy, the stuff's got to be true and it's got to be fair. And once again, we've touched on this before. Celebrities, politicians, and the famous who live their lives in public have less justification for keeping their lives private when they themselves decide to, especially when they're out in public, and especially when they try and switch it on and they switch it off. And I mean, there are some desperately sad cases of exactly that. And I'm thinking of Princess Diana, who would complain of invasion of privacy, and then have certain accepted media have access that the others didn't, which led to a totally feral, unethical, and competitive state. But then you can't declare. They've still got rights is the key issue. Everybody has rights, and the children and the other relatives of celebrities and politicians have even greater rights. It's not their fault that their parents are famous or publicity hounds, and especially if they're under the age of 18. So the old newsroom rule of thumb in terms of invasion of privacy: if a cabinet minister is quietly drunk at home on a weekend night, that's their right. If they're quietly drunk in their office on a Monday morning, that's news. And I think that should be fairly obvious. Once again, we can see the public interest there. The person, if they're drunk, they're not able to perform their duties. Then, but equally, if they're at home and they're not bothering anyone, and alcohol is legally allowed to be bought, then that's not an issue. If that person, if we were looking at the issue of controlled substances like drugs, that'd be a different issue. Then all of a sudden, that cabinet minister snorting cocaine or any of the other banned drugs would then be news. Okay, especially if there's people around that. I've got another question from Scylla. I'm just checking here. All right. I've written a feature film that mentions the correlation between the TOT system, I think you mean the DOP system, is a method of alcohol enslavement of farm workers, and the prevalence of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in South Africa. I have a study from a professor from Oxford University. Any risk of being sued by the wine industry? Okay, right, let's just talk about the DOP system for DOP. Basically, that was a form of payment that exists, unfortunately, I think still to this day on some farms in the Western Cape, where workers and their families were paid in alcohol, in the wine. And there's a huge link to that level of alcohol abuse, and institutionalized alcohol abuse has led to this fetal alcohol syndrome in South Africa. You know, kids being born to mothers who are effectively alcoholics. So there's a lot of news about that, and a lot of and there's been a lot of coverage about that, Scylla. So I would suggest that once again, if we look at these notes, let's get hold of the somebody from, you don't have to get, you could either get the farm, but I mean, it's going to be a study. So you'll find that I think the wine industry down here has a kind of body that is a lobbying group for it, and find out and get them on camera. And by getting them on camera and putting the thrust of what these accusations are to them, and giving them the opportunity to reply, then you've effectively you've been fair, number one. And there's no doubt whatsoever that the DOP system is true, number one. Fetal alcohol syndrome is true. And there's a massive public interest in the fact that children are being born in a country with the highest Gini coefficient in the world. That's now, as you all know, that's the issue of the gulf between of inequality that exists. So yes, there's a huge public interest in this film, and I would just say to resolve that. Oh, I see. So this is saying, now this is typical PR people. I approached a PR of the wine industry, and she swore I'd never get the film made. Well, how would you like to do that? There we can have that malicious compliance thing which I spoke about, which you can say at the bottom in the, put in a subtext. We approached Jane van Pochenpoel, who's a PR for the wine industry, and we quote, open quote, but that's just me being nasty. You just say, you know what, you've got your notes. If anybody tries to sue you, you did approach them and they refused to comment. And that's it. So you show proof that you did that you did try and reach out to them. You offered them an opportunity to put their point of view in the thing, and they declined it. And that's all I would do. And then basically you'll find that it's not you that's going to be in trouble. What's going to be behind the scenes is that PR is probably going to get fired. But I hope that helps. But no, I think you're on the money there. It does exist. There is public interest. It is a true thing that's happening. And you've reached out. Bang, there you go. Okay, so let's look at, can we move on there, Tembi, to slide 17? Let's look at what invasion of privacy is, and what you can get away with, and what you can't get away with. So invasion of privacy is considered intercepting, recording, monitoring of communications Okay. I don't know what it's like in your countries, but in South African law, if you are party to a communication, you can if you're participating in a communication, you can record it. From a journalistic point of view, we've always said down here, something is on the record or off the record. On the record or off the record wouldn't necessarily preclude me from recording it. It would preclude me, if something's off the record, I can still record it and keep it as my notes. But if I've given someone my commitment that it's off the record, I can't then put it on the record, by meaning I can't use that information and describe it to the person I was speaking to. Okay, but I think this is what they're talking about. Invasion of privacy here is the intercepting, recording, and monitoring communications of third-party communications. Next to that is surveillance, stalking, and harassment. Then entering a private home, eavesdropping. Once again, if you haven't got permission to be part of the conversation, that's eavesdropping. Searching a person, okay? Interrogating a person, hacking or unauthorized access into a computer. All of those are fairly common sense. And yet, if you're doing investigative journalism, you are going to perhaps fall foul of one of two of those things. And we're going to get to that. So some of you might never ever you'll look at that list and think, I'm never going to be guilty of that. But some of you might be. In other words, an example of eavesdropping or monitoring communications. If somebody goes and drops off a whole bunch of tapes or recordings of people speaking, you've effectively already eavesdropped, and you've monitored communications, even though you didn't do the actual monitoring. Unauthorized access into a computer. One of the biggest investigative stories that has happened in South Africa was the Gupta leaks, and the Gupta leaks was inspired very much by the great leaks, and we've seen them. There's phenomenal leaks in the rest of the world, like the Panama Papers, etc. All of that is unauthorized access into files and content that people don't want you to have access to. So let's move to the next slide. We've also got the disclosure of private facts. Okay, so, and I'm sure these are similar, once again, across the world. Private facts down here are defined as health and medical information. We've spoken about HIV again, HIV status, and that's an internationally accepted issue. Terminal disease, person's financial affairs, person's sexual life and or sexual orientation, given that in some countries, I see Banjo wants to ask a question. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. Yes, Tembi, could you let Banjo ask the question? Okay, there we are. Tembi, can we let Banjo in?
I'm trying to give him access.
Okay, so while we wait for Banjo to arrive, so we're talking about sex life, family life, and the contents of private correspondence. And when we get back on after Banjo's been on, we'll talk about the issue. Okay, Banjo says he doesn't want to ask the question anymore, or right now. So we look forward to that question just now. Tembi, if we just get back the slides. So we're talking about, the disclosure of private facts. Once again, we're looking at, when we're talking about defamation, we're talking about things that are defamatory in and of themselves without having to be proved. Equally, I would say that the disclosure of private facts, by definition, are private and should not be published unless we can prove why, the compelling reason why we should have done that. So if we go to the next slide, which is, let's explore. How did we get the information? How were the private facts obtained? Now, this is vital for the whole issue of whistleblowing. If you got them legally and then you published them, you'd rely on the defense of public interest. And I'm looking now, Scylla was saying, you know, she's got a whole she's got a whole lot of information that is actually in the public realm. Now, oftentimes you'll find people will, especially once again, we're dealing with unscrupulous people here. This is, you know, when you defame someone inadvertently and the person's reasonable, you can sort it on a handshake. When you're dealing with unscrupulous people, they will quite happily lie to you with a straight face, and even though you got the material in an open environment, they will then move. I've seen politicians move and civil servants move to get stuff classified ex post facto, and that's how unscrupulous they are. So if you obtain them legally and then you publish them, you'd rely on the interest of public interest. If you obtained them illegally, and I'm going to give you an example here, you'd have to prove an overwhelming public interest defense. And this is normally what happens in the case of the publication of whistleblowers' evidence, because we've just explained how that material would be illegal. Okay, because in the strictest interpretation sense, you don't have access to classified documents, secret documents. You know, if we look at what happened in the UK with the whole thing with Tony Blair and the, you know, basically the constructed rationale to actually go to war in Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction, which was a total construct. Now, they would, and I think they have, the British government had, or the Blair administration rather, did at that stage say, yeah, but this was illegally got. And and what they would do is they would say that, yeah, you've broken in Britain, I think it's the equivalent of like a State Secret Act, which has mandatory imprisonment, etc., for breaching that. Okay, but sometimes, as in that case, you're going to say, but look at that. You actually went to war. So many of your soldiers died. For what? For something that didn't exist. In South Africa, there was a story where the then Minister of Health, and some of you will remember her if you ever were dealing with the HIV and AIDS pandemic. In the beginning, she was an HIV denialist. Anyway, but she was also an alcoholic. And what happened was she wasn't actually entitled to a liver transplant, but went and got one, jumped the queue, and was continuing to drink. And a newspaper down here actually illegally got hold of her files and published them. And I mean, that breaks just about every single thing we've just gone through. The newspaper claimed they were justified in publishing her medical records, which had been leaked to them on the grounds of public interest because the truth spoke to her unfitness for office, both personally and professionally. Okay, and the court agreed. So the court agreed that. Another issue you're going to find is that if there are two parties to a private document, like, for example, paternity issues, and one of them who's involved actually leaks it to you, it's going to make it very, very difficult for the other party to prove that there's been a breach. Okay, let's go to our last slide, which is the allure of social media. And the key things is that the biggest issue about social media is that it encourages us on a plethora of different platforms, mostly on our smartphones, to publish opinions, retweet, and just get involved in this debate. And then all of a sudden it blows up in our face every single time. You can't put retweets are not an endorsement. It's nonsense. The courts are going to see you as a publisher. Any person, whether journalist or not, the moment they start putting opinions out there on social media is de facto a citizen journalist, whether they're publishing videos, whether they're publishing opinions, whatever, and they've got to apply to all the rules that we've just been speaking about during this last hour. The key, you've got to be so very careful. People put hashtags on. You can't come back afterwards and say, oh, well, and it doesn't help. It does not help. Trust me on this. It does not help to delete your social media account afterwards, because some clever clog somewhere has actually gone and taken a screenshot of the offensive thing that was said. So when we put in hashtags, we are doing hashtags to try and create an awareness and an interest of the opinion we're making. And the more we retweet, unless we say when we're retweeting and we contextualize why we are retweeting this, that is the only defense we're going to have, that it was not our intention to put this stuff across. And the other key thing, and you'll remember that I alluded to earlier, was the footprint of the defamation that's been created. And the easiest thing on social media is to check how many people have actually had access to or seen the video or retweeted itself. And if you are the person, and it hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen at some stage, where people who are subjected to defamation on social media, and remember, it's already been weaponized. We've seen it being weaponized allegedly by Russian people in the US presidential campaigns. We've seen it down here in South Africa, incredible character assassinations. At some stage, it makes it very, very easy for the person who has been defamed to actually put together a dossier that proves A, the defamation, and B, the quantum of people that have seen it, to then be able to go and create a plausible case for considerable damages. And I'm being told to wrap it up here, so I'm going to hand over to, I think, Paula, you're going to come back in and we're going to take some questions, or... But while I wait for Paula to come back in, one of the big issues we've seen with social media, especially down here in South Africa, is this issue of echo chambers. Social media is based on algorithms, so people start thinking that they can speak almost freely to fellow travelers, people who believe in the same that they do. And they start, and we find it with anti-vax, we find it with the anti-vax movement, we're finding it with the climate change denialists, and then of course down here in this country, racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and once again, not just from a defamation point of view, but also in terms of the crimen injuria, the criminal libel, the criminal defamation, and also publishing of fake news, which can then orchestrate itself into public disobedience and insurrections. There was almost an insurrection in South Africa last July, and of course, we don't need to think too hard and too far about the effects of QAnon and the use of fake news disseminating through Twitter. I mean, it was so bad eventually that Twitter banned Trump. So you can see exactly how it all fits together. So that brings me to the end of this session. It's been wonderful chatting to you guys, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. And I'd like to wish you, as an ex-journalist, I'd like to wish you as journalists the very, very best, all the energy and all the resources that you can have to do the job that you do. It's we've never needed good journalism, great journalism, more than we need right at the moment in every part of the world, to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable, to keep us honest, to keep us accurate, and to stop the ascent of despots and the destruction of democracy. So thank you all very, very much for this. I hope it's been useful. And if I can, my email address is on the documents that will be posted later. If I can be of assistance to you, please reach out. And if I can, I'll help. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.